Hey beautiful people, thank you for tuning in to History with Chemistry. Today we're going to talk about the literal purge that took place during and after Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana in 2005. If you're new here, give me a follow. I do Black History. I teach the true Black history, things you're not going to learn in school. Also, I have a TikTok and an Instagram. It's going to be linked below. But without further ado, let's get into it. To briefly go over what Hurricane Katrina was, it is basically one of the largest hurricanes to hit land in America, and it took place in the Gulf Coast states, which consisted of Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, and Florida, and also some of Texas. So this was a Category 5, the worst hurricane that you could possibly experience. Now, it didn't make it no better that New Orleans sat some 8 feet below sea level. So New Orleans sat like a bowl, at the bottom of a bowl, in something like a valley. Now, the major parts that were hit was the St. Bernard Parish and the lower 9th Ward. All of the 9th Ward was hit, but the lower 9th Ward was where it was flooded the worst. It is common knowledge that there was a large amount of people that lived in the lower 9th Ward and St. Bernard Parish that heard loud explosions as the levees broke. And if you know anything about the hurricane, it was basically that the levees, and a levee is basically a wall that blocks water from going into a certain area. Well, that levee broke and it let water in. But a lot of people heard explosions near the levee. To expand on that fact, I want to go back to 1965 during Hurricane Betsy, where the New Orleans local government admitted to blowing up the levees to preserve and protect the white neighborhoods so that they were able to make money, ultimately flooding the predominantly black lower 9th Ward and St. Bernard Parish. So this mindset of it being blown up was not a new concept. It was something that did happen, that the government flooded the black neighborhoods to protect the white neighborhoods. But fast forward to 2005, Hurricane Katrina, we're here now. Hurricane Katrina had wind speeds up to 180 miles per hour, some of the fastest and hardest wind blown in America ever. If you can imagine, this brought in a lot of wind, water, and a lot of destruction, which flooded people out of their homes. Waters got to a minimum of 18 feet deep. That's a 2-story building. In the lower 9th Ward, St. Bernard Parish, there wasn't a lot of 2-story buildings that weren't companies, that weren't established through some type of corporate entity. So these homes were completely demolished. People were forced to either go on the roof or find the tallest building and go on that roof during a hurricane. You follow me? To give you a little background on the conditions, although it was windy, it was 100 degrees outside. During and after this hurricane, it was 100 degrees outside. This is August 29th. So this is like the end of the summer. It's some of the hottest days. And these people were forced to be put in this condition by what most people think is the government, because they believe they blew up the levees like the first time they did it. Some 80% of New Orleans was underwater. It's the other 20% that wasn't underwater still got severely flooded. Also, side note, other cities in other states were hit tremendously and very bad by Hurricane Katrina, like Alabama, in Florida, and things like that. Not as many people died, and it wasn't nearly as bad, but those areas were negatively impacted. But back to Hurricane Katrina. Now, we can go back to the day before Hurricane Katrina. Let's go there. So the city knew about this hurricane weeks in advance, but there was some speculation that it was only going to hit Florida, or it was only going to hit other states. It wasn't going to hit New Orleans, but they found out that it was going to hit New Orleans 4 days before it made landfall. And when they found out, when the local government found out, they did absolutely nothing. Now, before I move any further, I want to rewind to the day before Hurricane Katrina hit land. That was the day that they issued a mandatory evacuation, and by they I mean the local government. Now, to me, that's not nearly enough time, because they knew about Hurricane Katrina for weeks. 4 weeks. It was some speculation that it wasn't going to hit New Orleans, and some speculation it was only going to hit Florida, but regardless, it was coming to the Gulf Coast. And with that knowledge alone, there should have been an evacuation, but there wasn't. The mandatory evacuation wasn't implemented until the morning of the hurricane. The hurricane came in the middle of the night, and that morning before is when they issued the mandatory evacuation. Now, New Orleans is not a cash-rich place. Okay, the areas that were going to be negatively impacted regardless, no matter where it hit, was going to be the lower Ninth Ward in St. Bernard Parish, which I'm going to give you some statistics that I found. St. Bernard Parish and lower Ninth Ward had 127,000 motorless people. These are people that had no car at all. That was up to 65% of their population. The amount of handicapped people in St. Bernard Parish and the lower Ninth Ward, and I'm only mentioning these two because they were hit the hardest and they were hit first, but the percentage of handicapped people, and I mean completely immobile people that were wheelchair bound regardless, was 37%, which doesn't sound like a lot of people, but when you think about it, the amount of people that could leave and did leave has now taken away from that total population. Now these people are stuck here. I have nowhere to go. They have nowhere to go. I need you to put yourself in their shoes real quick as I tell you this story. The people that were left in the lower Ninth Ward, actually all of New Orleans, that didn't have a way to leave or had no means to leave, were evacuated to the Superdome. If you know what the Superdome is, it's basically a huge football arena where the Saints play. And if you watch football, that's where the Saints play. And it housed a great amount of people. It housed 150,000 people. But it wasn't meant to house people. It was meant to sit in chairs. And the Superdome didn't even make it past the first day of the hurricane. The first hour of the hurricane, that's when the roof started to cave in. That's when panels started to fly off. So imagine the condition that everybody in general was in. But let's talk about the people that was on the streets that couldn't make it to the Superdome. There were a number of white militia groups, white extremist militia groups that came from other cities, other parishes, with the sole intention to kill black people, and under the guise of protecting property. Because now you could call these black people that are simply looking for somewhere above ground, simply looking for something to float on, looters. Now you can call them gangbangers. Now you can call them gangsters. And you have the capacity, the right to protect your land and kill these people. Hundreds of black people were murdered by gunshot wounds, and then later explained as, oh, they were impaled by something during the hurricane. These are just undocumented deaths that we will never get justice for. But back to the hurricane. After spending days in the Superdome, and if you can imagine the conditions that these people were living in, there was no water, there was no electricity. That means there was no sewage system. It was literally just a huge pile of shit. The Superdome, as people that were there would call it, was a sewer. It smelled so bad. The conditions were horrible. There was no medical attention. People were dying from diseases. People were dying from wounds that they got from the hurricane and they were never saw for, because there was no type of preparation. Now I need you to imagine, at this point you'd expect the government's going to do something. The government has to give a fuck, right? No, bitch. George Bush was over in Iraq taking pictures, and then he also flew to San Diego to play golf and take pictures with Tiger Woods, and then also he was on a fucking world tour doing photo ops while black people were literally dying in New Orleans, not trying to send aid. And then when he was questioned about it, he said he didn't know about Hurricane Katrina till 4 days after it hit land, according to him. Now, we're a few days in after the hurricane. The hurricane lasted roughly a day and some change. So the winds have died down. Now it's just flooded. Now you get to see the damage that the hurricane caused. And rescue teams are called in from FEMA. Everybody knows how famous FEMA was because of their lack of help during Hurricane Katrina. FEMA sent in groups of people to rescue people and put them on bridges and have no other plan for them. We'll get you from the water and we'll put you on this bridge. But there's no food here, there's no medical help, there's nothing else but a bunch of other people that we put here to now die and starve to death and be forced to jump into the water to go get help. But do you see where I'm going? Like, they were not prepared for this. If anything, they didn't give a fuck. The local government didn't give a fuck. Our federal government didn't give a fuck. Our federal funding for emergencies didn't even give a fuck. This is going to be the end of part 1. There's going to be a part 2. If you're still here, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. Again, my Instagram, my TikTok is below. Give me a follow. Love ya.